Assignment China was already a 12-part documentary series. Why did you feel it was important to turn that into book form?
When you do a documentary film, lots of wonderful material ends up on the cutting room floor. That always happens with films. And so there was a lot of very rich stuff that never made it into the series. And also, a book is a very useful resource, and the stories of the reporters who covered China are so interesting, and I think especially today, given the state of relations between China and the US and the importance of China in the world, to get a sense of who these reporters were and what they did and how they did what they did is very, very valuable. So having a book that people can refer to I think just makes that more accessible to more people.
Reading the book, I was really struck by how difficult it was for journalists to gather all of the information to tell China's story accurately. Would you say that for journalists, China is kind of the equivalent of a diplomatic hardship post?
China has always been a hugely challenging beat. Before the 1949 Communist Revolution, it was a country that had faced war, internal turmoil. The challenges back then were really just getting around the country. It was backward, primitive, racked by disorder and violence. After 1949, it was a different set of challenges. With the Communist Revolution, the American and most of the Western press corps were forced to leave China. Once Richard Nixon went to China, and then after the US and China established diplomatic relations, it became possible for American correspondents to be based in the People's Republic. But that presented a whole host of other challenges. For a long time, travel was very restricted. When I was a correspondent in Beijing for CNN, I opened the CNN Bureau in 1987 and was there for 8 years. You had to get permission 10 days in advance in writing from the Foreign Affairs Office of the place that you wanted to travel. If the degree of openness in the society is kind of ebbed and flowed depending on the state of domestic politics in China and the state of US-China relations. So there were periods, for example, in the late 80s where China was quite open and people were very accessible. But in more recent years, especially under the rule of Xi Jinping, the climate has gotten much, much darker for journalists. It's still possible to travel, but it's quite challenging. Journalists who are there report they're being followed. They're often physically harassed, in some cases beaten up. It becomes increasingly difficult to talk to people because people are afraid to talk to reporters.
Now, in the book, you label Taiwan the new listening post for many foreign journalists who were expelled or barred from entering China since 2020. How has China coverage evolved since the arrival of these correspondents in Taiwan?
Taiwan has increasingly become a kind of new center for China watching. It has the advantage that it's a Chinese-speaking society. There has been a lot of back and forth with mainland China. There are certainly a lot of people who follow events in mainland China. But it's still, I think, extremely frustrating. The tools are a little bit more extensive than back in the old days when I started out as a China watcher in Hong Kong in the mid-70s, but it's the Chinese press, it's the Chinese internet, but there are these other very interesting new tools now. Satellite photographs, for example, commercially available satellite photographs are very useful. They were critical in the reporting about the detention camps in Xinjiang, for example, and they were critical in some of the reporting about the upsurge in deaths when China abandoned zero COVID. But what's lacking, and it's true for China watchers here as well as anywhere else, is the ability to sort of do the main thing that reporters really should be doing and love to do, which is go out and see for yourself. One of the results is that a sense of China as a kind of living, breathing, complex society of 1.3 billion human beings, all with their own hopes and frustrations and desires and challenges, is really lost.
Given this, what do you see as the future of China coverage?
Covering China is hugely important and increasingly difficult. And as long as China remains on its current political path with very tight domestic controls and severe restrictions both on the number of journalists allowed to be based in the country and on what the journalists who are based in the country can do, it's going to be very limited. And I do think this is going to mean that the role of China watchers in Taiwan and elsewhere is going to be really important. People are going to have to keep working to devise new tools, new resources to get a sense of what's going on in Chinese society, but without being able to see it and hear it and smell it and touch it and interact with the people. Something very crucial is lacking, and that's a big loss for China, and it's a big loss for everybody else outside of China who needs and wants to understand the place.